Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
My guest today is Jake Kalick. Jake is the co-founder, along with his childhood friend Chip Malt, of the one and only Made In Cookware. Jake began his career working for the family business, supplying equipment and cookware to restaurants in the Northeast, something that the family's been doing for over 100 years. In 2017, he decided to take the leap from supplying to creating his own vision of what cookware should be. And this is no small feat. Anybody that knows the industry knows that the ability to compete with the incumbents, especially the ones making stainless steel clad cookware for restaurants, is incredibly challenging. But Made In has definitely succeeded, now creating and supplying some of the best cookware on the planet, not just to restaurants and hotels, but also to households across the country and the world. Jake and I have gotten to know each other over the years, and I could tell right away when I met him that he has this incredible passion for what he does and really high standards that not only make him a perfect fit for doing what he does, but also someone that any chef will have a deep respect and appreciation for the vision that he has for this company. This becomes obvious when you see some of the chefs that he's partnered with, like Tom Colicchio and Grant Achatz and Nancy Silverton. So we dig into all things cookware, everything from the difference between stainless steel and cast iron and carbon steel and why to use which one and how they're made, and gadgets in the kitchen and plateware and glassware and a bunch more, and generally just have a really awesome conversation. So I hope you enjoy as much as I did. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you today about many things. It's been cool. We've been able to do some work over the last couple of years. So thanks for the support there.
Are you kidding? You've been the supporter. I appreciate you guys hooking your customers and clients and team up with Made In and getting our product in the right hands. So I thank you.
What better thing to gift than Made In Cookware? Let's get into that. I'll just give a little brief background of you. You can indulge more if you want. What I loved about hearing about your background was that you came up in the distributor world, well, equipment distribution. There's a ton, obviously, we could talk about there. And that world is so different from what you do today with direct to consumer, which is really interesting as well, because I think that's a bit of the disruption of what Made In is doing as well, just the accessibility of these products. But you said you wanted to stop doing that. It was a family business, but you wanted to stop selling other people's products and sell your own. Why? Harbor Foods is a very well-established equipment distribution company, among other things. Sells some really awesome products, stoves, kitchens, appliances, tools. What made you decide, do my own thing?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think if there's one thing that I lament are the customers not knowing enough about, it's that we're actually, Made In's a brand born out of a long time in the food service equipment industry. We're not just some Instagram startup that started making cookware 6 years ago with no expertise or passion or interest in the category. So I think we take a lot of pride in the fact, we say we're a 7-year-old startup born out of a 100-year-old family business. And that's something that I think we use to our advantage when it comes to understanding what we're designing and what we're building and who we work with, all that stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But why I wanted to get into my own brand and stop being a middleman. I think first and foremost, it's more fun to have your own brand. I think you can build your own personality around your brand and your products stand for a little bit more, candidly. I also just saw the opportunity to build a brand that people cared about in the kitchen tool space. I have a lot of respect for the brands that we sold in our family's business, a lot of good products that we take a lot of cues from today, but there weren't a lot of brands that had chefs' attention and loyalty. It was a lot of commodity items. And I think what inspires us at Made In is building a kitchen tool brand that chefs actually are attached to and take pride in and appreciate representing and enjoy engaging with. So building something that captured that. And at the end of the day, working in a family business is hard. And I did 5 years of it. I'm super close with my dad, but I think it was time for both of us to try something new. And, he's still running that business. As you said, it's a great business, and Made In isn't Made In without it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It had to be a little scary knowing that all clad is the incumbent, for sure. And the first thing you started with was clad stainless steel before you got into carbon steel. What were some of the most unexpected challenges or things that you didn't plan for when you started? I know there's a lot of R&D going into before you ever launched your first pan.
At the end of the day, like we're not reinventing the wheel here. The dynamics of a quality pan haven't changed much in the last 50 years. You know what I mean? So there was R&D, yes, and we wanted to design something that we believed in. But I'd say that it took us 8 months to even back into a supply chain that made sense for making a clad frying pan. And that was before we did anything else. It took us a lot of time to figure out where to source the raw materials, how to clad them, how we could punch them, what made a good design. So I think there was a lot of twists and turns in that process. And along the way, we took a lot of cues from the brands we were selling at my family's business. So everything from the import Winco's, cheaper wherever pans, the nicer Valrath, all the way up to the Maviel and the All Clad and the Citram, right? We really looked at everything that was out there and how they were made and how they were designed and what was good about them and what was kind of over the top about them, and kind of dialed into a product that we believed in.
I mean, what were some of the common threads there between, or were there any between things like Maviel and All Clad and things like Winco and fill in the blank, any other sort of like commoditized type of pan that was analogous to what worked well across all those types of brands? Because obviously there's really scaled, commoditized things that work decent. A lot of kitchens use Winco and a lot of kitchens use these sort of higher end All Clads. Anything common that you found across all this?
With cookware, there's two things you think about. One is the raw materials and how they're constructed. And then the second one is the actual construction of the pan itself. The common threads I think people will understand are like, from a construction standpoint, handles that stay on. That's like first and foremost, super important. Then you can get into like how the candles are designed, how they dissipate heat, how ergonomic they feel in your hand. But at the end of the day, it's like, do they stand on? Do they not wobble? Can they take a couple of years of abuse in a full service restaurant without having to be replaced? The raw materials is an interesting one. And I think what we learned a lot about raw materials. I think the first is that consistent, even raw materials throughout the body is the key to success. So a lot of even nicer companies will have thicker bases, thinner walls, which lead to really inconsistent cooking. So a lot of the good performing products, not even expensive products, are even from the base all the way up to the rim, right? We knew that was something we wanted to do. And on the flip side, we saw a lot of really nice brands out there that just stuffed these pans with over the top materials that were unnecessary. And it was a little bit of diminishing return when it comes to the value they provide. So love All Clad, a lot of respect for their product, but they have a lot of higher end editions that have a lot of more expensive materials within the pan itself that, in my opinion, was diminishing in terms of return and value. So we clad stainless steel and aluminum. From our perspective, it's the best combination of performance, but also value without driving up the cost because you're putting in things like titanium or copper,
Yeah, it's a minimalist approach. And how did you come to that? Obviously, so you're starting this process, right? You're like, okay, we need to build a 2.0 clad pan, right? So when did you just start to decide things that could be removed? Was that sort of inputs from working with chefs? How did that work?
It was selling pans to chefs for 5 years full-time, but growing up in that business too. So you would hear the inner dialogue of chefs as they were picking out what they were using and buying from us for their kitchens. And it's, I'm buying this for this reason, or I'm not investing in this for this reason. And it kind of just triangulated the right product. And I should say this, right? Like when we started, we wanted to undercut the premium incumbents in terms of price. We had some pretty good guidelines as to how much we could sell a pan for while still undercutting the incumbents in terms of price. We knew we wanted to make a 5-ply pan for $75, where All Clads was $150. So that kind of set us on the right track. We wanted to perform as well as that All Clad D5 pan, but we knew we wanted to be able to undercut them in price because at the time we had no brand recognition. We had no reason to be out there in the market. We were really trying to prove ourselves. And a lot of these brands, especially that start online, the first proof point is price point, right? That's how a lot of these like digitally native brands start. And then as we came into our own brand and got our own reputation and established ourselves from a performance perspective, the price doesn't become the primary attraction. It becomes maybe secondary, maybe tertiary. And now we take a lot of pride in the fact we never really lead with price. We lead with performance, quality, heritage.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to definitely dig into your process of how you're creating all these products and also a lot more about the materials you use, because I don't know if everybody knows Made In relates to where the product's made. And it sounds like the materials that you use, and just as important, where they come from and who's making them, who's fabricating them, how that's getting fabricated is incredibly important to the brand. If it's cool, we're going to sort of geek out a little bit on things like stainless steel, carbon steel, that kind of thing. But before we get into that, obviously you started with stainless steel, you went to carbon steel after that. Now there's a whole line of all kinds of things, plateware. I think you're probably working on flatware and tools and things like that. What's the underlying vision here for what you're doing with Made In? What ties all that stuff together, how you create these products?
The vision is that it's really difficult to be an educated consumer in the kitchen tool space. And the analogy that me and my co-founder use is that, like, if you walk into a Williams-Sonoma and you want to outfit your kitchen with high-end performance, premium, whatever term you want to use, goods, you have to learn the 10 players they have in stainless clad. And those companies only make stainless clad cookware. Then you move on to the knives, and there are 50 knife companies, and none of those knife companies really make any cookware. Then you move into plateware, and those plateware only do tabletop. Then you go into wine glasses, and wine glasses don't even do plateware. So you have to learn all of these different categories and all the players in them. And the result is it's really tough to build brand loyalty in the kitchenware space because nobody wants to learn all of these different players in all these different categories. So our thesis very early on was, let's just build all of these categories the right way. And if a customer falls in love with us for carbon steel, then we can cross-sell them into plateware and stainless steel and enamel cast iron. Or if they come in through plateware, we can convince them that they should start buying our knives and kind of all these things because there's no brand loyalty. And so that's the vision for the brand and why we keep making new categories. I would say what ties the product together is focus on raw materials, the commitment to performance, and the fact that all of these products are rooted in hospitality use. So even if we're selling a stainless clad pan to a mother of 3 in Dallas, that product has still been tested and developed because of its ability to perform in a fine dining restaurant or a 3-meal period, 700 covers a day restaurant. It just might be kind of updated to the aesthetic of that home use in Dallas.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, I think to your credit also, the other piece of that with a lot of these products and brands is there are some companies that do have kind of a full stack, if you will, like array of products, but I don't think any of them are sort of vertically integrated. It's more of an acquisition play, like they'll filing by stub or something like that. So there's not really like the same focus and the same approach to building to each of those sort of verticals of what you use in the kitchen. Whereas I think with Made In, you're doing the iteration, the building, the product release, as opposed to like finding companies that you can work with. And I think that's probably another unique thing about Made In as well.
Yeah, and I've never understood, and I'm not tipping anyone off to this, I'm sure they've talked about this. I'm sure they've talked about this a lot, but like I've never understood why like a group Seb that owns All-Clad doesn't pair them up with one of their knife companies and like kind of cross-sell more carefully or use the various factories they own to like develop product under the different brands. Because to your point, as a cook and somebody that's really passionate about the industry, you understand who all these conglomerates own and how they all play together and who's part of what family. But the average consumer, even the average passionate home cook, doesn't know what that looks like, that these companies are tied together. So yeah, I think it's selling it a little bit short.
And I think part of what creates an evergreen market share for Made In and companies that have this kind of approach is that you build this trust once you establish like, here's how we build and here's why, right? Materials are important to us, where they come from, things like that. So this is our stainless steel. Now this is our carbon steel. And consumers start to get a feel for like, okay, this is what it means to buy a product from Made In. So when they start working on plateware, you can have this sort of correlation between, okay, the same way that they approach building, stainless steel is how they're going to approach china or forks. And I think that's really important, right? Because you're building that trust. And then as you start rolling out new products, that trust sort of carries on as opposed to just, again, acquiring a brand and hoping that they have the same values as you. Okay, so we're going to see how far we nerd out on this, and stop me whenever you're like, dude, this is like a little too.
Totally. Let's nerd out on it. This is good.
Obviously the audience here is professional chefs and restaurateurs and things like that, but I'm sure people that are not in that realm will also be listening. So we're going to talk a little bit about stainless steel, carbon steel, cast iron, right? Why and how you think about deploying those materials into the products you build for the audience. And you can kind of elaborate on this, but stainless steel, right? There's like chromium in the steel that helps like create this thin layer of oxide and makes it non-reactive. So acid like doesn't sort of react in the food, not porous, easier to clean, things like that. What else should we know about stainless steel as a chef that we might not know that is why it's so important in pans? Is there sort of like a big delta between good stainless steel in pans and bad? I know there's different, obviously, like thicknesses that we think about, but anything that you think we might not know about stainless steel when we're buying pans. That's important to know.
The reason you use stainless steel, and I think the biggest difference for a lot of the chefs listening that might just use a heavy duty aluminum pan, is that stainless steel is just a much better holder of heat. It retains heat a lot better than that heavy duty aluminum pan. So I think the best example is when you're keeping an aluminum pan over a burner in the kitchen, you need to keep that burner on high, because as quickly as heat's coming into that pan, it's leaving. Because aluminum is just a sieve of heat, right? Like it just does not hold heat. Whereas opposed to stainless steel, like you can keep that burner on low to medium, because once that heat gets into the pan, it's sticking around there. So that's really the biggest difference here, right, between the two materials. And then, there's obviously durability and the fact it's not going to dent as easily, doesn't impart flavor on your foods. It's going to heat more evenly across the pan because it holds heat in all of those various sections. But from like a quality perspective, the difference for our business is it's not even as much about where you source the actual raw stainless steel. That is important, but where you actually clad the stainless steel to the aluminum is where you can really see huge performances in the durability and performance of the pan. So depending on how reliable the cladder is, and cladding is rolling together the various metals to make the discs that get stamped into the pan, depending on how reliable the cladder is how long those pans can stay intact and how well they stay intact. And if you have an unreliable cladder, and if you buy cheap metals that might not clad as well, that's where you start to see pans come apart. The clads don't last as long.
Yeah, I'm going to double click on clad a little bit later when we talk about some of the people you're working with, some of the families you're working with. That's helpful to understand about stainless. I feel like carbon steel is getting a lot more love lately. It used to be just like everybody, and home cooks as well, just sort of romanticized cast iron, which cast iron is great, by the way. It's very heavy, whereas carbon steel is much lighter. It's still, lightweight, but has amazing heat retention, heats quickly, evenly, that kind of thing. But at least for myself, I know less about carbon steel other than we use it to sear fish in pans in the kitchen. It works great for that. But like, is there a standard ratio of carbon to steel? I know you put carbon in with the steel. Is it always the same? Are there different ratios that make the pan differently? Anything we should know about carbon steel that the layman might not know?
The carbon steel story for us is really funny. So when we launched the business, my co-founder, Chip, he's like an e-com online. That's his secret sauce. He's run online brands before and grown them and stuff like that. He was like, hey, listen, we should make cast iron. It's so popular. And it is. In the United States, cast iron is so popular. But I was looking and I was like, there are so many good vertically integrated cast iron brands that are already doing cool stuff online, things like Finex and Smitty and Field Company and things like that.
Yeah,
so
Field is great.
We don't really have an approach here. And selling to restaurants, I was like, listen, as popular as cast iron is in the United States, carbon steel is as popular in European kitchens. Just like you have every home in the US has their cast iron skillet making cornbread or searing steaks, in Europe, they have the equivalent in carbon steel in every home kitchen. And then combine that with the fact that all of these chefs who were selling tools to weren't buying cast iron for their kitchens. They were buying carbon steel for the same applications. So we said, you know what, like let's take a chance on trying to sell carbon steel to all these customers that online would be cast iron customers. And we had no idea if it would work. The first run we made was 750 carbon steel pans. And part of us were like, we're going to die with these things in our warehouse. Like we're going to find no way to sell these things. And then they sold really quickly, and now it's 12% of our business. So yeah, that's been really fun to see how, the home consumer have adopted that product, and obviously chefs love it as well. Getting into the composition of carbon steel, it's actually interesting. Cast iron has more carbon than carbon steel does. They're very close. Cast iron, for example, is 98% iron, 2% carbon. Carbon steel is 99% iron, 1% carbon. So less carbon in carbon steel. And where you see the performance difference is that carbon is actually more brittle. You know that because when you have a high carbon knife, they're more likely to chip So carbon is more brittle, which is why you see cast iron skillets tend to be like a little bit more flakier. And carbon is also more porous. So it's why carbon steel knives stain more. But carbon's more porous, so the pores on a cast iron skillet are bigger, which is why when you try to season a cast iron skillet versus trying to season a carbon steel pan, a cast iron skillet takes a month longer to season because those pores are so much bigger. So you have to fill those pores with oil, you have to polymerize them, you have to do it again and again and again. And if you season a carbon steel skillet for the first time, like you did your cast iron skillet, it's going to look like a hockey rink because there's not enough pores in that surface to capture all of that oil you're feeding into pan. So it's kind of interesting. but that's really some of the main difference there.
I had no idea how little carbon goes into
Yeah.
the name's deceiving.
Yeah, it's mostly iron.
Cool. Well, this is where we'll get a little bit more weeded, maybe, but we'll see. I was just fascinated to hear about the producers that you work with. It reminds me of in cooking, right? We know the farmers that are growing the food or that are raising the cattle, and a lot of them have been around for many, many, many generations. And it's the same holds true for what you're doing. And so there's this family in Tennessee that's fabricating the stainless steel, I understand.
Yeah, we still work with them for sure.
So a couple things here. One, is cladding like this very sort of generational thing that sort of is passed down? Are there a lot of cladders around the world? And what is unique about this family that clads the steel for you?
The first cladders we worked with weren't actually the Tennessee family. It was businesses in Pennsylvania. And cladding is most common in mass industry, and especially in the US in the auto industry. They do a lot of cladding for automotive. And the part of the business that clads cookware is the specialty cladding business, which is a very, very small niche part of the market. So yeah, it's a very industrial process. You have these huge coils of various metals, and they get cold rolled on top of each other and then stuck together and then cut out into discs. And then we ship them to Tennessee, where they get punched into cookware. Now we do a lot of stainless clad cooking in northern Italy as well, outside of Milan, which is a huge stainless steel industrial manufacturing center. And our friends in Tennessee, like, we owe them a lot because they had the ability to punch discs into cookware. And we came to them saying, like, we have this idea for this business. We're going to make our own cookware. We're going to sell it online. And they weren't the first factory we talked to. Most just looked at us like we had 20 heads and were like, yeah, no thanks. Like, we've been doing this a long time. We don't want to go on Amazon. Like, they you know, like,
all right, kid.
yeah, more or less. And these folks totally got what we were doing, and we've had a great relationship.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's our whole thing, right? Like, we're rooted out of a family business. We really enjoy working with people that have been doing this for a really long time as well. And I think one of the things that's most important in these relationships is, like, we're not engineers by trade. We don't own our own factories. We don't have that kind of portfolio. So we need to find these partners that can work with us and that have the built-in institutional knowledge of engineering, of design, of quality assurance, because we don't have, especially when we started, now we have some of those roles, but like when we started, it was me who knew how to sell kitchenware, and it was my co-founder who knew how to sell stuff online. And we didn't have engineers, we didn't have material chemists, we didn't have all these roles that these factory partners already had built in. So we depend on them a lot. We bring them ideas and they say, like, okay, here's what works, here's what doesn't work, here's what we've seen in the past. So without them, like, we wouldn't be able to make the product we do.
And I'm sure as you scale, QA is probably a linchpin or a pain point that you probably need to, like, bring in-house more as well, right?
It's tough. I hope that any of your listeners who use Made In have seen strong consistency in the quality of the product. But yeah, it's a different beast. I mean, it's like a chef going from serving 50 covers a night to 400 covers a night. It's just a very different process, and it requires a lot of different oversight.
This podcast is brought to you by Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mies is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food costs and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmies.com. All right, so we talked about Pennsylvania, where they're cladding, Tennessee, where they're punching it out. I don't 100% understand what that means, so I might jump back into that. So there's the family business in France that's producing these carbon steel pans for you. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
I think the one we were talking about was the knife factory in France.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Our carbon also comes from France, but we have a partner in central France that's 7th generation in the knife business. There's an old town called Thiers, which is in about an hour outside of Lyon. So, like, talk about an awesome food trip. But
Oh, yeah.
the whole identity of this town is knife making. When you're in like the countryside of France and you're driving down the highways, each town has their own sign with like illustrations on it for what the town's known for. And usually it's like a wine glass or a piece of cheese, or, like a lot of the towns claim a lot of the same things. When you get to Thiers, it's like knives on the signs. And the whole city has built their identity on knife making. It's like super romantic. There's a river that runs through Thiers. All the factories were originally built against this river because the river fueled all of these big wheels that ran the forges that hammered out the knives. Like the whole thing is like built around knife making. And anyone who lived there has either works in the knife business or family works in the knife business. And so when we wanted to make a chef knife, we knew that this was one of the few places we would want to go and try to build a relationship with. And we found this family that the woman running the business is 7th generation. They've been around for 500 years, which is crazy to think how long this business has been run by the same family. And yeah, like it's a classic example of she believed in what we were doing. She lent us all of her expertise in engineering and design and all these things like this, and helped us bring a prototype to life.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of other knife companies that source from there as well, right? It doesn't Lac Wheel?
Yeah, they're close by. I mean, Sabatier started in that region of France as well. When you look at Western knife making, there's Solingen and there's Thiers. Solingen's in Germany. It's where a lot of the big German knife companies have started, and it's much bigger in terms of footprint, but they're both super respected and storied when it comes to knife making.
So what was that experience like when you went over there? I imagine there had to be some similarities between every company that looked at you like you're crazy when you're trying to get them to produce products for you in the States. How was that going over there and talking to the family about producing knives for you?
Well, it's funny. The secret sauce for us in this situation was that Pascal, who runs this factory, she has 3 children, and none of them wanted to go into the knife business. I think they all lived in Brooklyn and worked in startups.
Really?
So like we came over there, and she kind of adopted us as like her kids in the family business. It was just like Freaky Friday swap, right? So yeah, she was like, my kids don't want to work in this business. They're actually living in the States, working in startups.
Did you know that going over there?
No, we had no idea. It's just so fortuitous. And we kind of became like her work children. And she took a lot of passion and interest in this project and making sure it was successful. In a weird way, like continued on her family's thing, which was really just interesting and amazing. And you can't even script that.
So the family's 7 generations, that's hundreds and hundreds of years. Like what is the facility like there? I mean, imagine that it's probably, modern at this point, but is there any piece of sort of old world that still survives with it?
For sure. I mean, there's still a ton of hand finishing when it comes to grinding and sharpening the knives. Whenever we get a complaint that like, and we get it a lot more with home consumers. We're like, this knife doesn't feel as sharp as it should be. Like a chef will just generally like sharpen it themselves right out of the box anyways. But, it's because like, listen, these are hand finished when these knives come out of the forge and once they're cut. There's still a lot of that. I think what's happened in this region in general is that the capacity these factories need to produce has grown so much over the last couple hundred years that they've had to bolt on different operations around town. What all used to happen under one roof now happens within like 4 different facilities within driving distance of each other because they just can't grow in the same footprint they were in. So it's a little bit fragmented and it causes some operational strain, but that's just what they had to do to keep up with the demand that changed from the 1700s to the 2000s.
So how often do you have to go back over there?
Our team is in France 2 or 3 times a year. We're hitting each factory at least once or twice a year. And newer factories, we visit more frequently to make sure that things are standing up correctly. And we have a team out there now that stop by and check in on things. But again, we just have a really good working relationship with these folks. We really become ingrained in their business. It's very different than manufacturing in Asia, for example, where it's like contract manufacturing that's just send us the PO, we're going to make you it. You kind of have to like go out there and keep an eye on things. This feels a lot more like working with a family business. And, we talk to them once a week. Every factory we work with, we have weekly phone calls, video calls, and we're checking in on purchase orders, new product development, investments that are being made in the factory, things like that.
Wow. So your team's visiting all over there. You also you're sourcing plateware, or at least it's being produced in England, right? Stoke-on-Trent. Can you tell me about that facility and how that works?
That was a cue we definitely took from the family business. Okay, like where are all the best platewares for high volume hospitality coming out of? And it's all the UK. There's several awesome factories and brands that are out there. So when we thought about making our own plateware, it was like, okay, like what does our brand stand for? It's high performance, it's durability, it's utilitarian aesthetic. and it's like a deep history in wherever these products should be made. The intersection of that Venn diagram for plateware is England, and central England specifically.
Does any of that have to do with the aristocracy having sort of these ornate china, and that's why it's being produced there?
That, and also just some of the best clay in the world comes from that part of the UK. I mean, there's such a history of pottery there that like the Stoke City Premier League team is the Potters. That's how big this industry is there. So it was like a no-brainer for us to go out there and try to build a relationship and get product made there, which has been great because plateware is really interesting for us. It's one of those things that it's tough to sell online because a white plate looks like a white plate. I mean, you know this, when you hold a high quality plate, like you can feel the difference, you can feel the durability, you can feel how less likely it is to scratch because the porcelain's vitrified and it's stronger. So it was an example of something that kind of always undersold online to where we thought it should be. But we just opened our first store, our retail store, a Made In store in Austin, Texas. And everyone who walks in there picks up a plate and is like, this is the nicest plate I've ever held, and ends up like leaving with some tabletop. So I think having in real life experience with that is really going to be a game changer for our tabletop collection.
What are some of the challenges with making a really great plate?
The biggest challenge, believe it or not, is just the fact that it's such an aesthetic decision. There's a million people out there that hate our plateware design, and there are a million people that love our plateware design. It's unlike a pan or a knife where it's like, this is just supposed to perform. It's going to look like a pan or it's going to look like a knife. Everyone has their own opinion about what a good plate looks like. And our whole thing is, as you know, as somebody who's used it, is like, we don't give you 5 different types of stainless clad. We give you stainless aluminum clad of this thickness, of this construction, because we believe it is the best combination of performance and value, right? And like, we tried to take that approach with plateware where it's like, we're giving you this one style collection of plateware that is utilitarian, it's timeless, it's high performing. But then you have people that are like, why isn't it in solid colors? Why isn't it square shaped? It feels too heavy. Why isn't it more like bone china? So I'd say the hardest thing for us on plateware was just trying to make a one size fits all. And every week we're like, are we going to do a second style? And we've kind of held off on that for now.
Well, it's commendable, honestly, because there's always sort of this inkling of like when you have a business and a product where you're just going to start doing more and making more. But I love the approach of just like, keep it simple, make sure it is the best of what it is. And you guys have plenty of years to build more. But yeah, no, I love that. So let's get into sort of how you create these products. I want to just sort of get a better understanding of how you iterate and sort of like launch new products. And we know that it started with a lot of iteration before you even launched the first one. But how does that process work today when you have an idea for either a new product line, like maybe you're getting into flatware, maybe you're getting into, I think you mentioned you're going to start making rondeaus. That's fucking awesome. When you have that idea, what's the next step?
It is talking to a lot of chefs. Yesterday, I sent an email out to 25 chefs very close to the brand that would answer an email about a new category we're thinking about going into. And it's like 4 simple questions. I can give you some new product foreshadowing now. I can't give you this one yet because it's so far out, but we can talk about some new stuff we're releasing. But it was like, what about this product do you like in what you use now? What annoys you about what you use now and what you would change? Raw materials. What about this product? Raw materials do you look for? Do you look for something that provides certain type of qualities or performance things? And then lastly, it's just like, what brand are you using now and why do you love it so much? And that went out to 25 people yesterday, and we start to triangulate qualitative and quantitative feedback. And then we go into the family business harbor archives, and it's like, okay, like when we were selling stuff to restaurants, like what were they buying? Why were they buying it? What brands do we like? In my past lifetime, like I toured a lot of these factories and went to trainings at these factories and brands because they wanted me to be better at selling it, right? So it's like, okay, like what do I remember about how they did things? And then we start to put stuff on paper, draw it up, show this to people, get feedback, start to do prototypes, get feedback. We involve a lot of chefs, and we're very grateful that they're willing to play ball with us and give us their time.
We have a similar outlook. I'm not sure if it was intentional, but chefs are sort of this gateway to how consumers will adopt something. Now, we think about it with their recipe tool that eventually, we have consumers all the time asking to use it for their home cooks, and we're not quite there yet. But we know that as chefs adopt this thing more, that consumers eventually will. And you clearly are doing that. I don't even think you set out to sell to chefs when you started, but it's clearly now resonated so well. It doesn't hurt that Tom Colicchio invested early on and that Granite Chats came on board to partner and consult and things like that, or however you guys work together. How do you think about involving chefs in the R&D process as it relates to the end product for the consumers? Or is the involvement with the chefs just to make sure that the product is just so good that we know, I think like strong enough for a man, made for a woman, strong enough for industrial kitchen, made for a home cook. How much are they a part of what the end product becomes?
As much as they want to be. I think you guys do this too with your brand. We just try to be authentic. And that comes down to the products we make, but also like our relationships with a lot of these chefs. As much as they want to give, we'll take if they're comfortable helping us work with a product all the way into the hands of a home cook. Like, that's awesome. I think one thing that's really inspiring for us when it comes to home consumers is like, sometimes you provide them with a product. I don't know how I've ever cooked without this, whether it's like a specific tool that they didn't even know existed or a quality of a product that they maybe had at home, but ours is just such a higher quality that it makes everything better. And I think we look to chefs for a lot of that inspiration, because what are chefs using on a daily basis in kitchens that make their life easier? A fish spatula is such a good example, right? We're releasing utensils soon. A fish bat is like the best thing to buy somebody that's passionate about cooking at home, because they don't have one. And once they start using one, they use it for everything. And it's like the ultimate hack, right? And getting chefs to give feedback like that, or looking at what chefs use on a regular basis and figuring out how you bring that into the home, is like the most fun thing to do. It's a great story too.
Well, the Peltex was it's pretty ubiquitous. So I'm interested to see what you come up with there. Have you ever thought about specific use pans, paella pans or tagines or a nabe or something like that? It might be just tough in terms of like, market share or like the amount that you can actually sell.
No, I mean, we've done some things like that. We've done a paella pan that kind of comes on and off our website. It's nice because like a paella pan, for example, is the best material for a paella pan. And we also did a comal with our friends at Hacienda.
Oh, nice. Is it carbon steel?
It is carbon steel. We'll send you one to try out. This is a great example, right? We got a call from Jorge at Hacienda, and he was like, hey, not only do we sell the masa and the masa harina and like all that stuff, but we want to sell the tools to do the whole thing. And he was like, we want to make a comal. And he was like, the best material to make a comal out of is carbon steel. So he figured he would reach out. And for us, it just made so much sense because one, we already have that supply chain built. It just requires tooling a new handle and changing the shape of the carbon disc and the stamp, and you have the ideal comal. So we worked with them on what the size, diameter, angles of the walls, handle, all that should look like. When somebody like that approaches us, it's, now we have the authority to go into this new product and make this product for someone that's like, we have no expertise on how to make comals. Either a brand like Hacienda is going to ask us and help us, or a chef is, right? We have plenty of examples of making products for chefs because they ask for it and give us the authority to make that. So we do these single product uses. And for us, sometimes they come on and off the website. In the case of the comal, we actually just let Hacienda sells that. It has the Made In brand on it, but very rarely does it show up on our site. But the paella pan, like we make some, we put them on the site, they sell out. And when we have a break on our line and we can make some more, we make some more and bring them back. And that's kind of how we work on things. Some things we try to always keep on the site. Some things kind of come on and off based on when we have time to make them.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to throw something out there. You probably get this all the time, but I want to talk about lids for a second. I think there's a lot of opportunity with lids. So a lid is pretty single use, right? Now you guys have something that is a little bit more universal, right? That can work with multiple pans. But one thing that I think could be super interesting is a lid that has some sort of attachments based for different use. For example, like a cartouche, right? So right now we as chefs, we create this parchment thing and, we throw out the parchment every time. We got to make it into this circular shape, get a hole in the center. You have this cartouche that you can braise with. And the only reason for it is to let a little bit of steam escape, but not a lot, right? For making spätzle. And we have like this thing that we put over a pan that like where you scrape the spätzle in a spätzle maker. There might be a formal name for that. A lid is a lid, but I feel like if you had different inserts for like a cartouche or a spätzle maker, you could have one lid that has many, many uses. Have you guys ever thought about like, multi-use lids?
We have. The honest answer to that one, and we have some chefs that have come up with some really good ideas for that. The stumbling block we've hit is that whenever you get to that level of complicated tooling and like different parts and like all these kind of components, the only way you can tool that and build that for a remotely reasonable price is in Asia. So you're not going to find a factory in the US or in Europe that can create all of this tooling and build all these components and do all this stuff. And then when you tell me you're making like a lid like this, it's like, yeah, and I want to spend any more than 80 or 100 or $120 on it at most. So then when you combine all that, that's going to cost you thousands of dollars a lid to make in the US or Western Europe. So I think that when we want to do that, we just have to be a lot better at manufacturing in Asia. And we don't do a lot of that right now. Our universal lid that we made that fits all of our pans and has a steel interior so you can use it in the oven. That's made in Asia. It's one of the only things we do there. And I think as we get more comfortable manufacturing in that part of the world and working with those types of partners, we can start to design these really complex things that require really complex tooling in all different components and do it at a price that our customers want.
Yeah, it's always one of the bummers about the intersection of art and commerce is no matter what, we have these barriers of you could make the most amazing lid in the world, but it would be at a price that no one could really afford. And, that's just, I think that it's a part of technology and innovation in general. I do think if you came up with this sort of like multi-use lid, it probably could be something that you could license, right? So if you had a patent on it, and it would probably only work for a Dutch oven in that case, where it was a cartouche and a couple of other things. But if you had a patent, and then every other company also that makes Dutch ovens could use the patent. But anyways, sounds like you've heard that before. So I'm not the only one.
We always appreciate the ideas. We've had crazier.
Why Austin? Why'd you guys set up in Austin? Because you're from Boston, right?
Yeah, my co-founder and I are from Boston. We grew up together there. And we started the business there, but we agreed early on that as soon as we saw some traction, we would move somewhere else. And the three things were somewhere neither of us had lived before, somewhere that was fun and had a good culinary culture, and somewhere that was good for the business, good for bringing people in. And Austin was like the intersection of that Venn diagram. And so we moved here not knowing anybody. And it was me, my co-founder Chip, and his now wife Marcella, and it was just like the three of us. And it was great because like we moved here, didn't know anyone, built a team, and we're heads down building this thing from day one. There were no distractions because we didn't have any friends. Like we didn't know anyone, we didn't have any family here. So not only was it a great brand town and a great culinary town where the chefs are super willing to help, but also we didn't have any distractions.
It's a great food town. Yeah, so many great chefs there.
It's awesome, man.
So this might sound like a dumb question, and I say it every time I ask it. I gotta stop saying that, but it's just because you're a creator, right? So you're always thinking about new things. Like if you had unlimited resources, meaning unlimited capital and unlimited time, what would you do next? Or we just talked about money constraints with a lid, right? That's a microcosm for this question. Like if there were no constraints, what would you launch next? Whether it's a new product or new business or whatever.
I can give you a vague answer to this because it's actually something I one day want to do. But I think there's so much equipment used in commercial kitchens that make cooking so much easier and better that home cooks are not aware of or have no access to. I think taking some of these really interesting machines and appliances that chefs use in commercial kitchens and building them for home use would be super interesting. And there's like 2 or 3 specific things that I think are just like total game changers, and getting them in the hands of home cooks would be super interesting.
Like what? You maybe now my mind is like bubbling up. Like a pasta boiler or like...
But we got a couple that are super interesting and in things that you never would use at home, but like chefs rely on every day in the kitchen, right? There are certain tools, certain machines and appliances, but we haven't gotten involved with anything that plugs in. As a kitchen brand, that is the line that you have to be very cognizant whether or not you want to cross. Going from stuff that doesn't plug in to stuff that plugs in is a huge leap. And we haven't done that. I don't know if we're ever going to do that, but if I had all the time and resources and money, I would get into bringing some of those commercial hospitality machines to the home.
That is pretty dope. Like if you had a stove and it had a little pasta boiler and it had a plancha and it had a wok induction, but all your pans could fit into these things. That could be pretty dope.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of good whisks available for homes. Like Matfer makes an incredible whisk. Like most chefs use like this balloon whisk for Matfer. I think there's a lot of opportunity there too. I don't know why. There's just so many of them are weird shapes or too firm and hard, like and thin, or too soft. I don't know why that is, but that would be another.
We got these utensils that we're still waiting to finalize the prototypes, but they'll be out in the next year for sure.
That's awesome.
And there is a whisk, there's a fish bat.
Oh man, that's awesome. Anything else you want to share with the culinary world at large?
No, I mean, I appreciate you having me on. I mean, I love so many of your clients and what you've built. We're just happy to get in front of the best chefs, and anyone who wants to try some Made In should just reach out. We're happy to sample, so don't hesitate.
Well, we have some more contests coming up for the chefs to win some more Made In stuff. So
amazing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the time today. I hope your power gets back on soon.
Yeah, I'm broadcasting from a powerless office here in Austin. We got some nasty weather.
Well, more importantly, congrats on the newborn coming soon. And if you need any advice, I'm sure you have a lot of friends that have kids. I have 2 now, so if I can help at all, I'm happy to share, but enjoy it. Hopefully you can take some time off and help the wife out.
I appreciate that. A lot of people recommending we make baby cookware sets now. Well, I appreciate it, man. You're a very good moderator.
I appreciate it as well. Thanks, Jake.
See ya.
And we will talk again soon, and I'm going to be visiting Austin soon as well. So
cool.
Cheers, man. Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.